Off my ramp. I don't care whose paperwork you're holding, Princess. You don't stand on my aircraft. Senior Master, Sergeant Dackham said it with his back half turned. The way a man says a thing he has already decided isn't worth a second look. The cargo bay of the C-130J went still around him. 11. Loadmasters and crew chiefs at Falby Carwell stopped what they were doing, and not one of them moved toward her. The woman in the dusty flight suit did not step back. She stood at the edge of the lowered ramp with her helmet bag in one hand and a kneeboard in the other, and she let her eyes go once around the bay the way a person counts a room before they walk into it. Pallet locks, the litter stanchions stacked against the forward bulkhead, the oxygen manifold. She counted everything, and she said nothing. And to Dackham that silence was the proof he wanted, that he had read her right. A ride, along. Some headquarters guest in borrowed kit who would faint when the engine spun up. He had been a loadmaster for 19 years, and he had learned that there were two kinds of people who came up his ramp without an aircrew badge clipped where he could see it. They argued or they apologized. This one did neither, and that bothered him, in a place he could not name, so he turned the bother into volume. Did you hear me off? She came down the ramp, 2 steps, even unhurried. Boots, flat on steel. She did not argue, and she did not apologize, and as she passed the crew door, she let her shoulders come down a 1/4 inch that nobody on that flight line would have seen. What none of them knew yet, at 5:41 on a morning the dust had turned the color of old bone, was that the manifest Dackham had refused to read carried her name in the block reserved for one person on any aircraft, and that in 2 hours and 10 minutes the 11 men in that bay would be alive only because of the woman he had just called Princess. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from this morning. I want to see how far this one carries, because what happened over the next 2 hours at Falby Carwell is the kind of thing the Air Force does not put on a recruiting poster, and the men who were there have argued about it ever since. Her name was Captain Rona Taggart, and the reason she had walked up that ramp at all was a piece of paper Dackham would have read if he had looked, and a decision she had made 9 days earlier that half the wing was still calling a coward's call. 9 days earlier, on the night of the 14th, Taggart had been the aircraft commander on a resupply run into a strip the planners called Objective Iron Lacha, a gravel scrape in the Helmand corridor that the maps still listed as friendly. She had gotten to the holding point at 5:51 and looked at 3 things in the time it takes to pour a cup of coffee. The cloud deck was sitting at 400 feet and dropping. The strip lights were lit on the wrong sequence. 2 reds where there should have been a red and a green. And the tower, when she called it, answered 11 seconds late with a voice she did not know. She had aborted. She had turned a fully loaded Hercules around in a valley narrow enough that the wingtip clearance was a number she would carry the rest of her life. And she had flown the load back to Carwell, with the colonel's voice already building on the radio. The next morning, the wing had its verdict. Captain Taggart had lost her nerve. She had wasted a sortie and made the ground element wait another 12 hours for ammunition, because she did not like the weather. There were officers who said it kindly, the way you say a thing about someone you have decided is finished, and there were enlisted men like Dackham who did not bother to say it kindly at all. Nobody knew yet why the strip lights had been on the wrong sequence, or who had been holding the tower frequency at 5:51, or what would have been waiting in the tree line for a 4-engine aircraft committed to a 400-foot approach onto a captured strip. Taggart had a guess. She had filed it in writing the same morning, and the form had gone into a tray and stayed there. So when the tasking came down for the morning of the 23rd, an aeromedical evacuation off a contact in the green belt south of Carwell, somebody in the scheduling shop had done the thing schedulers do when they want to make a point. They had put the disgraced captain on the flight. Let her fly the milk run. Let her do something that could not go wrong. That was the paperwork Dackham would not read. She stood now at the bottom of the ramp in the cold blue light and waited, and the 11 men in the bay waited too, watching their senior loadmaster decide what to do with a problem he had created. Chief Master Sergeant Verlinden, the flight engineer, was the only one not watching Dackham. He was watching her, the way she came down those steps, flat-footed and even, the way her eyes had cut the bay into pieces and put it back together, the kneeboard in her left hand. Berlinden, who had 31 years and 4 wars in him, had gone very, very still. He had seen that walk before, and he could not remember where, and it would not let him go. "Chief," Dackham's voice, again lower now, pitched for the bay and not for her. "Get this sorted. Whoever she is, she's not flying with my load." Verlinden did not answer right away. He was a tall man, gone gray at the temples, with hands that had loaded everything the Air Force owned for 3 decades, and he had a habit when he was thinking of pressing his thumbs slow against his first knuckle, like he was checking a torque value only he could feel. He pressed it now. "What's the name on the manifest, Dak?" "I didn't read the name on the manifest. I read the helmet bag and the kneeboard, and that nobody told me a passenger was coming on my bird." Dackham slapped the side of a pallet with the flat of his hand, a sound that cracked across the metal bay. "We launch in 20 for a med run. I don't have time for a tour." The woman spoke for the first time then. She did not raise her voice. She had a flat, level register, the kind that does not climb when a man's does, and that steadiness landed on Dackham like an insult he could not file against. "You have 18 minutes, she said. "Your number 2 strut is sitting low. You want to look at it before we put 40 people on this airplane." Then she turned and walked toward the flight line shack and did not look back to see whether anyone checked the strut. Query, the youngest crew chief, 22 years old and 3 months in country, drifted toward the number 2 main gear. Because he could not help himself, he crouched, he looked. He came back into the bay and said nothing, but his face had a question on it he was afraid to ask out loud, and Dackham saw the face and chose not to see it. "Strut's fine," Dackham said to no one. It was not fine. It was 1,100 pounds low on nitrogen, and it would matter later on a strip nobody had planned to land on. But that was 40 minutes away, and right now Dackham had a med run to load, and the small, ugly satisfaction of a man who thinks he has won something. Verlinden watched her go. "Dak," he said. "What was on her kneeboard?" "How would I know?" "Approach plates," Verlinden said. She had the Carwell plates clipped on top, and a strip diagram under them hand-drawn. He let that sit in the bay. Passengers don't carry hand-drawn strip diagrams. Dackham did not have an answer for that, so he gave the order to start loading the litter stanchions, and the bay filled with the noise of men glad to have something to do with their hands. Somewhere south of Carwell in the Green Belt, a platoon was loading its own wounded into trucks and counting them, and the count was climbing. The first call came at 6:09. The forward surgical element passed the numbers in the clip stripped-down voice men use when they are too busy to be afraid. 12, urgent. 14, priority. The rest routine, and the rest was a number that kept moving because the contact had not stopped. By the time the C-130J taxied, the surgical element had revised it twice, and the last revision came through Verlinden's headset as he stood at the top of the ramp doing the math that loadmasters do. "Say again your total," he said into the boom mic. The voice on the other end said it again, and Verlinden wrote it on the back of his glove because he did not trust himself to remember it. 40. 40 souls coming off that strip, on litters, and walking, and one being carried by 2 men who would not put him down. 40 was too many. Verlinden knew it the way he knew the weight of every pallet he had ever chained down. The Hercules could carry 40 people. It could not carry 40 and the fuel to get to the green belt and back, the medical team, the litter rigging, and still hold margin for a hot strip, a soft field, and a strut somebody had decided was fine. Somewhere in that arithmetic was a number that did not close, and the man supposed to be running it was up forward telling the youngest crew chief that a captain he had thrown off the ramp did not know a strut from a stanchion. Verlinden keyed the interphone to the flight deck. "Crew engineer, we've got a problem with the load plan. Total casualties just went to 40. We need to talk about weight and balance before we commit to that strip." There was a pause on the interphone. Then a voice answered. Calm, flat, level. The same register that had told Dackham about his low strut, and Verlinden felt the back of his neck go cold, because he placed the walk in the kneeboard and the voice all in the same instant. "Engineer, aircraft commander," the voice said. "I've already run it. We're not landing with full fuel. Co-pilot's dumping to a planned ramp weight on my mark. Tell the loadmasters the litter tiers come out of the forward third only. We balance aft of station 477, or we don't fly. Acknowledge. In the cargo bay, Dacom went still. He had heard the voice on the interphone, the same as everyone else, and he was doing the thing a man does when the floor of his certainty drops an inch, which is to look for somewhere else to put his eyes. "Who is that?" he said. Verlinden looked at him for a long moment. He did not enjoy it as much as a smaller man would have. "That," Verlinden said, "is your aircraft commander. The one you called Princess." He keyed the boom mic. "Aircraft commander. Engineer. Litter tiers forward, third balance aft of 477. Acknowledged. And ma'am..." He paused. "We've got a strut question. Number 2 main. I like eyes on it before we put 40 aboard." "I already looked at it," she said. 1,100 pounds low. We're going anyway, and I'll tell you why when we're airborne. Engineer, get me a chain. Count on every litter stanchion in the back, by number, and have Sergeant Dacom call it to me himself." Verlinden allowed himself, for 1 second, something that was not quite a smile. "Copy all," he said. "Stand by for the loadmaster." He looked at Dacom, across the noise of the bay, and held out the boom mic on its cord. And the gesture was a small cruelty and a small mercy at the same time. "She wants the count," Verlinden said. "From you by number. Don't round it." Senior Master Sergeant Dacom took the boom mic, and he called the chain count, and his voice was not steady, and Rona Taggart did not make him pay for it. She listened to him call out 22 stanchions by their patent numbers, and when he skipped number 14 because his throat closed on it, she said only, "Say again 14. And he said it, and she said, "Good count." Chain 14, and 17 cross-loaded. The rest single. "We go in 4 minutes." That was all. No knife in it. She had a strip full of 40 wounded waiting on her, and she did not have a single second to spend on a man who had insulted her, so she spent none. That restraint was not softness. It was the most expensive thing she did all morning, and the only person who understood that yet was the flight engineer, who had spent 31 years watching the difference between people who could not retaliate and people who simply chose not to. The Hercules lifted off Carwell at 6:31. The dump pump ran for 4 minutes, and the airplane came down to the ramp weight she had planned. Light enough to get into a short field and out of it again. Heavy enough that the margins were the kind you say out loud, so that 2 people are watching them instead of 1. In the right seat, Captain Ilsanmi had the fuel page up, and his finger on the totalizer. He had flown with Taggart before the abort, and after it, one of the few who did not change how he flew with her when the wing decided she was finished. He read the number off the totalizer now plainly so that it could be checked. On planned ramp weight in 90 seconds, we'll have 180 minutes of fuel at the strip with no diversion margin. "Then we don't divert," Taggart said. "What's the green belt picture?" "Contact still active. The collection point moved twice. Last grid puts the strip 800 meters from the nearest reported fire." Ilsanmi paused. 800 meters, Rona. That's inside small arms. I know what 800 meters is." She did. The strip she was about to land on was not on any approved field list, because nobody had planned to land a Hercules 800 meters from a firefight. Somebody on the ground had made it a strip an hour ago with a smoke grenade and a prayer, and now it was hers to find. Behind them in the bay, the medical team was rigging the litter tiers, exactly as she had called them. Forward third, balanced aft of 477, and Dacom was working the chains with his head down and his jaw set. And Query kept stealing looks at him and could not figure out what had changed, only that something had. Verlinden keyed the interphone. "Aircraft commander. Engineer, you said you'd tell me why we're going with a low strut, because the wounded don't get a second airplane," Taggart said. "And because a low strut is a landing problem, not a flying problem. And I plan to make the landing problem mine. Stand by, engineer. I'm going to need everybody in the back to be very good at their jobs in about 11 minutes. 11 minutes is a long time to fly toward a place people are shooting." Taggart spent it the way she spent everything, in pieces she could count. She had Ilsanmi confirm the approach she had drawn freehand on the kneeboard, the one Dacom had mistaken for a tourist scribble. A curving run-in that kept a ridgeline between the airplane and the reported fire until the last 40 seconds. A descent steep enough to stay out of the threat envelope and shallow enough that a low strut would not fold on touchdown. She had drawn it at 450 in the dark, on the assumption that the strip would be exactly where the worst case said it would be. The worst case was where it was. At 8 miles, she called the ground party. The voice that answered was young and torn, ragged at the edges. A medic doing 3 jobs, and he passed her the strip the only way he could, by burning a signal she could see. Morn 3. This is the casualty collection. I've got green smoke on the south end. You'll see it in a few seconds. Strips 400 meters of hard pack. There's a wadi cut across the last 100 you want to miss. We are taking fire from the tree line west. We have 40 for you, and I've lost 2 while I'm standing here talking to you. Please come now. Casualty collection. Missouri Orhen 3. I have your green smoke. Tagart's voice did not move. I'm going to land long to keep you off the west end. Have your litter team stack on the center line. Urgents first. My loadmaster will count you on. I'll be on the ground 90 seconds. Tell your people we are coming home with all of them, she said. All of them. She did not say most. The medic on the ground would remember that for the rest of his life. The way the voice in the airplane did not bargain with a number. The ridgeline came up on the left, exactly where her freehand line said it would, and she rolled the Hercules in behind it, down into the dead air, where the threat could not see them, and the airplane shuddered through the rotor off the rocks, and Isle Sanmi called the speeds and the gear came down, and a number 2 strut sat low and lopsided. And somewhere west of them the tree line opened up, and a few rounds reached out across 800 meters and did not find them yet. In the bay, Dackham stood at the ramp controls with his hand on the lever and his eyes on the strip rising up to meet them. And he understood, finally and completely, the thing he had refused to understand on the ground. The woman flying this airplane onto this strip toward those 40 people was better at her job than he had been at his for 19 years. He had told her to get off his ramp. She was about to fly his ramp into the only place on Earth that mattered. The strip came up. The green smoke streamed flat to the west, telling her the crosswind, and she crabbed into it, and she put the main gear down on the hard pack, long past the wadi, and the low strut took the weight, and groaned, and held. And she stood on the brakes and reversed the props, and the Hercules slewed and shuddered, and stopped with the ramp pointing at 40 people who had been promised they were all coming home. Ramp coming down, Dackham said into the interphone. And for the first time all morning his voice was steady because he had finally found a job worthy of his hands. The next 90 seconds were the kind that do not feel like 90 seconds to the people inside them. The ramp came down onto the hard pack, and the noise of the engines and the green bell poured into the bay together, and the litter teams came up at a run with the urgents, forced the way she had told them, and Dackham counted them. He counted by hand, touching the rail of each litter as it passed. 1, 2, 3. The way Verlinden had taught a generation of young loadmasters. To count so that the number was a thing you felt, and not a thing you guessed. The medical team tiered each litter forward third, and balanced it aft of 477, and a young soldier with a field dressing wrapped around his head walked up under his own power, refused a litter, and sat down hard against the forward bulkhead, with a rifle he would not let go of. Query was at the bottom of the ramp, pulling walking wounded aboard by the straps of their kit, and a round came in off the tree line and struck the hard pack 6 feet from his boots and threw grit across the back of his neck, and Query did not stop. 3 months in country, never shot at before, and he found out in that instant the thing you can only find out one way, which is that he would keep working anyway. Up front, Taggart held the brakes and watched the count climb on the loadmaster's call. 31, Dackham said. 34. 37. A pause. Loadmaster, aircraft commander, say your count. 37 aboard, Dackham said. 3 still on the strip. 1's a litter. 2 are carrying him. They're 40 meters out, and they're slow. The fire from the tree line was finding the range now. Taggart could hear it in the airframe. The flat slap of a round somewhere aft. And Isla Sanmi was reading her, the fuel, and the time, and the threat, in the same plain voice. And somewhere in the back of her skull, a clock she had been keeping all morning rolled over to a number she did not like. She had 90 seconds on the ground in her plan. The plan was at 110, and climbing because 3 men were 40 meters out and slow. Loadmaster, hold the ramp, Taggart said. We are not leaving 3. Tell me when you have all 40. Ma'am, we're taking fire, we should. We're not leaving 3, Sergeant. Tell me when you have 40. It was the only hard thing she said to him all day, and she did not say it to win. She said it because the man being carried was a soldier named Brizzy with a sucking chest wound, and Rona Taggart had spent her whole career refusing to be the person who left people on a strip. The reason why was a thing she had never told anyone in the wing, and it was about to be the only thing in her head. The 2 men got Specialist Bribby to the bottom of the ramp at 140 seconds, and they could not lift the litter the last height onto the deck because their arms were finished. And Dackham came down the ramp into the fire and took the head of the litter himself, and lifted, and Query took the foot. And they brought the last 3 aboard, and Dackham slammed his hand flat against the bulkhead and keyed the interphone. 40 aboard, he said. All 40. Ramp. Coming up. Go. And then, because he was a loadmaster, and the count was his religion, he said it again, so there could be no doubt in the recorder or in his own soul. 40, ma'am. I count 40. Taggart was already moving. She ran the throttles up, and the Hercules began to roll before the ramp was fully closed, down the 400 meters of hardpack with the Wadi behind them now, and the tree line off the left wing, throwing everything it had, and she lifted the airplane off the strip below the speed the book wanted, because the book had never been to this strip. And she put the Ridgeline between 40 wounded and the men trying to kill them. The loadmaster who had ordered her off his ramp 2 hours earlier was on his knees in the bay now, holding pressure on Specialist Bribby's chest, counting breaths out loud the way she had taught the whole airplane to count that morning, because counting was the only thing keeping the kid alive until the doc reached him. Senior Master Sergeant Dackham did not look up from the count. He had thrown the aircraft commander off his ramp at 5:41, and at 7 o'clock he was alive because of her, and so were 39 other people. In the right seat, Isla Sanmi let out a breath he had been holding for 140 seconds and said the only thing there was to say. 40 out. Rona. 40. Taggart did not answer. She had the airplane in a climbing turn toward Carwell, a fuel number with no margin, 40 people in the back, and one of them a kid with a hole in his chest, and she did not have a single piece of herself left over to spend on what she had just done. She kept her eyes on the instruments and let her shoulders come down a quarter inch that no one in the cockpit would have seen, and that was all the celebration Rona Taggart allowed herself in the air. Behind her in the bay, Chief, Master Sergeant Verlinden finally remembered where he had seen that walk before. It had been 6 years earlier, at a memorial for a transport crew that had gone down in the Hindu Kush in weather they should never have launched into. And he remembered now a young lieutenant at the back of the formation, a co-pilot who had survived because she had been pulled off that crew at the last minute for a check ride. Counting the names on the memorial board the way you count a room before you walk into it, he remembered being told, later, in a bar, the part the official story left out, that the lieutenant had argued against that launch and been overruled by a pilot in command, who did not like being told the weather by a woman half his age, that the man who overruled her had been flying when the mountain came up, and that the lieutenant had spent 6 years since flying every weather call like it was the one that killed her crew. Her name had been different then, before she married and changed it, but the walk was the same. Verlinden did not say any of this on the interphone. It was not his to say, but he understood now why she had aborted Iron Latcha into a colonel's contempt, and why she would land 800 meters from fire to take the last 3 off a strip. She was not brave the way the recruiting poster meant it. She had decided a long time ago, in front of the memorial board, that she would never again be talked out of the call that kept people alive, and never again leave anyone on a mountain or a strip or a tray in a scheduling shop. He keyed the interphone. Once, and all he said was, "Aircraft Commander, Engineer." The strut held. "Nice work, Bam," which in the language of a flight engineer with 31 years was a thing close to a prayer. "Copy, Engineer," Taggart said. "Tell the back we're 40 minutes to Carwell. Tell Sergeant Dackham to keep counting Brisby's breaths. Tell him the number out loud." And Dackham, on his knees in the noise, counted Brisby's breaths out loud all the way to Carwell, and the kid lived to hear the count. They put the Hercules on the ground at Carwell at 7:48, and the ramp came down on a flight line that had heard the whole thing. A med run that launches with 40 casualties off an unsurveyed strip 800 meters from active fire is not a thing that stays quiet. The command post had been listening to the strip frequency the entire time, and by the time Orin 3 taxied in, there were enough people on that ramp who understood what had happened, that the air had changed. Tegart shut the engines down and ran the checklist and did not get out of her seat right away because there was paperwork even on a morning like this. And Rona Tegart did the paperwork. Halasami watched her sign the forms with a steady hand and finally said what he had been wanting to say since the strip. They put you on this flight to bury you, you know. The schedule. It was a message. I know what it was, Tegart said. She capped her pen. Doesn't change the flying. It was outside, on the ramp, that the morning turned over for good. And it turned over not because a woman announced herself, but because a room was forced to reckon. The first thing that happened was that the records came off the airplane, the manifest, and the chain count, and the time log DACM had kept by hand and by Mike the entire flight, the count he had been ordered not to round. He had called 40 into that recorder twice, on his knees, with his voice breaking, and that count was now the official record of what came off that strip. The thing he had used as a weapon at 541, his loadmaster's authority over the manifest, had become the proof of her command at 7 o'clock. The manifest he refused to read carried her name in the aircraft commander's block. And the second thing that happened was that a vehicle came down the flight line fast and stopped, and a full colonel got out of it. And it was the same colonel whose voice had built on the radio 9 days ago when Captain Tegart aborted Iron Laksha. His name was Colonel Rehnquist, and he was the wing's operations boss. And he had spent 9 days letting his people call Rona Tegart a coward. He had not come to the ramp to apologize. Men like Rehnquist do not start there. He had come because 40 casualties off a hot strip lands on an operations colonel's desk as questions, and he wanted to ask his before someone above him asked them of him. He walked toward the airplane with his jaw set and his clipboard out, and the flight crew and the loadmasters and the surgical team all turned to watch what he would do. And the ramp went as quiet as the cargo bay had gone at 5:41. Rehnquist found Tegart at the bottom of the ramp, pulling her gloves off finger by finger. Captain, I'm told you landed off an unsurveyed strip. I'm told you held the ground past your abort criteria under fire. I'm going to need to understand the decisions you made out there, because some of them are going to be hard to defend on paper. It was Verlinden who answered, and a chief master sergeant does not normally answer a colonel's question for a captain. But Verlinden had 31 years, and he had decided this was a thing he was willing to spend them on. Sir, with respect, you want to understand her decisions. He held up the loadmaster's time log. DACM's own handwriting on the back of his own glove transferred to the form, the count and the times, and the freehand strip diagram clip behind it. It's all here. 40 out, no losses on the airframe. 140 seconds on the ground when the plan was 90, because she went back for the last 3. Tactical run-in. She drew at 4:50 this morning off a worst-case grid that turned out to be exactly right. He paused. Same way she was right 9 days ago. Rehnquist's jaw moved. 9 days ago, she aborted a resupply and cost a ground element 12 hours. 9 days ago, Verlinden said. She aborted onto an abort she filed in writing the same morning. The strip lights at Iron Laksha were on the wrong sequence. The tower answered 11 seconds late on a voice nobody could identify. She read a captured strip in a 400-foot ceiling and a comeback ambush, and turned the full airplane around in a valley rather than fly 40,000 pounds into it. That strip was taken by then, sir. We just didn't have the report yet. Her form's been in a tray in the op shop for 9 days with your distribution block on it. The ramp was very quiet. Rehnquist did not say anything for a long moment. He was a hard man and not a stupid one, and you could watch the arithmetic happen in his face, the 9 days of contempt running up against the count on the form, and the 40 people behind it, and the freehand line that had been exactly right twice. He had been a simple instrument of a wing that did not want to believe a careful pilot over a fast one, and shame in a simple instrument comes out slow. He turned to a captain on his staff. Pull the iron laction intel summary, the one that came in on the 15th. Read me the strip status as of 5:51 on the 14th. The captain read it. The strip had been in enemy hands. The friendly status on the map had been 12 hours stale. A 4-engine aircraft committing to a 400-foot approach onto Iron Lakshaw at 5:51 on the 14th would have flown into a prepared position. Tegart had known. She had filed it. They had called her a coward for 9 days. Colonel Rehnquist looked at the form in Verlinden's hand for a while, and then he looked at Captain Tegart, who had not said one word in her own defense the entire time, who had stood at the bottom of her airplane pulling her gloves off finger by finger and let the Count speak for her, because the Count was the only witness she trusted. Captain Tegart, Rehnquist said, and his voice had changed and the whole ramp heard it change. I owe you an answer on a form that should have had one 9 days ago. You'll have it today with my signature, and it will say you read that strip correctly and the wing got it wrong. That's the first thing. He paused, and he did the second thing, the way a man does a thing he is not used to doing. The second thing is that I had you put on this flight to make a point. I'd like to take that back, but I can't, so I'll do the next thing instead. He turned so that he was speaking to the ramp, and not only to her. 40 out, no losses, off a strip. None of you were trained to land on. That's this, captains flying. I want every person who launched on Morn 3 this morning to know I said that out loud. It was not a salute. The Air Force does not salute a med run on the ramp, but on a flight line, it landed the same. The men who had watched her get ordered off the ramp at 5:41 watched the operations colonel of the wing tell them she had been right twice and they had been wrong. And Rona Tegart had not raised her voice once to make it happen, she said. The only thing she said in front of all of them. Sir, the 40 did the hard part. I just flew the airplane. She looked, once, toward the bay, where the litter teams were carrying Brivy down to the waiting transport with Dackham walking alongside still counting breaths. And the loadmaster did the count. You'll want his log. He didn't round it. That was her vindication. She handed the credit to the man who had insulted her in front of the colonel who had condemned her, because that is what command looks like when it has nothing left to prove. The part nobody on that ramp saw came later, in the blue hour. Senior Master Sergeant Dackham found Captain Tegart on the flight line, walking the airplane the way she walked it every night, touching the gear and the props and the number 2 strut that it held. He had thrown a captain off his ramp that morning and he did not know how to start, so he started the only way a loadmaster knows how. Struts fixed, he said. Top to spec. I checked it myself this time. I heard. He stood there in the dust. I called you Princess this morning. You did. You ran the weight and balance in your head while I was busy deciding you didn't belong on my airplane. He stopped. And then you handed the colonel my count and told him I didn't round it. You didn't, Tegart said. You called 14, even when it stuck in your throat. You went down the ramp into the fire and took the head of Busby's litter when his guys were finished. And you counted that kid's breaths all the way home. She looked at him in the failing light. I don't need a man to like me at 5:41, Sergeant. I need him to call the count straight at 7 o'clock. You called it straight. Dackham looked at the airplane for a while. Where'd you learn to fly like that? He said finally. Off a strip like that, holding for the last 3 when the smart play was to go. And Rona Tegart told him, because he had earned the asking, the thing she had never told the wing, about Lieutenant Soren Vey, who had been her crewmate and would have been her commander someday, who had argued against a launch into weather 6 years ago in the Hindu Kush, and been overruled by a pilot who did not like being told the weather by a woman half his age, and who had been flying right seat when the mountain came up. She had stood at his memorial board and listened to the recording afterward, his voice arguing for the abort in a register nobody had listened to. I don't hold for the last 3 because I'm brave, she said. I hold because I know exactly what it costs to leave one. And I don't take the weather call from a louder voice anymore, not ever again. They can put me on every milk run they've got. The answer's the same. Dackham did not say anything for a while. Then he did the thing a loadmaster does when he has decided a thing. Next time you fly, Captain, I'd like to be on your ramp. He paused. If you'll have a man who called you princess, I count crews by what they do at 7 o'clock, Taggart said, not what they say at 5:41. Be at the brief at 4:30. The form came through 3 days later with Colonel Rehnquist's signature on it, and it said in the careful language of the Air Force that Captain Taggart had correctly assessed the Iron Laksha approach as unsafe, and that the wing's initial assessment had been in error. It did not undo 9 days of a wing calling her a coward, because paper does not undo that. But it sat in the record now with a signature, where the next board that read her file would have to read it too. Specialist Braby kept the lung. He wrote her a letter from the hospital at Ramstein that she did not show anyone, and asked her in it for the loadmaster's name, the one who counted his breaths, because he wanted to write that man, too. She gave him the name. Dacom got the letter the same week he flew his first sortie back on a ramp, and the freehand strip diagram, the one Dacom had mistaken for a tourist's scribble at 5:41, ended up pinned to the wall of the squadron planning room, where the young aircraft commanders coming up behind her could see it. Nobody put a name on it. They didn't need to. Query, the 22-year-old crew chief, who got grit thrown across his neck and kept working, made staff sergeant the next year and asked to crew on Taggart's airplane permanently. When the new kids asked him what she was like, he told them about a loadmaster who told a woman to clear his ramp, and a strut nobody checked, and a count of 40 that came home whole. He always ended it the same way. You want to know who's running the airplane, he'd say. Don't listen to who's loudest on the ground. Watch who's still counting when it's quiet. About a month after the Greenbelt, a message came through the squadron for Captain Taggart from a wing 2 valleys over Nazca. A request by name. The kind that means somebody up the chain had read a form, an account, and a freehand diagram and decided they wanted the pilot who drew them. It named an operation she had not heard of, and a strip that was not on any approved field list. And it asked whether Drehors was available. That was her call sign, the one from the Memorial Board days, the one almost nobody still used. She read the message twice, the way she read everything twice, and she clipped it to her kneeboard under the Carwell plates. She did not answer it yet. If you have ever been the quiet one in a room, the one the loudest man in it decided he had already figured out. Told to clear the ramp before anyone bothered to read your name. Then you already know how this one lands, and you already know why she went back for the last 3. The next story is the strip she clipped to her kneeboard, the operation nobody had heard of, and the call sign Drehors, flying into a place that was not on any list. It is on the screen right now. Go watch it, and tell me in the comments whether you would have held the ground for the last 3.